My sister Chloe smirked across the dining table, holding her crystal wine glass high. 34 years old, still single, and not a single child in sight. Are you planning to let your uterus dry up completely, Maya? Our parents chuckled loudly, their approval validating her cruelty. My white brother-in-law, Brandon, leaned back in his custom chair, laughing along. Oh, come on, Chloe. At least Maya has that cute little public relations job keeping her busy. I calmly wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, stared directly into Brandon's eyes, and smiled. Where are your savings, Brandon? Oh, right. I fund your entire lifestyle, but not anymore. The dining room fell completely silent, and our family dynamic was permanently changed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Atlanta, my parents, Reverend Thomas and Helen, obsessed over image. Inside our sprawling estate was a breeding ground for favoritism. Chloe was the golden child who gave them grandchildren. I was the scapegoat who worked a cute little job. The irony was lost on them. We gathered for Thanksgiving in the formal dining room. The table groaned under a catered feast I secretly paid for. Crystal chandeliers glowed over my family-curated performance. Chloe sat across from me, dripping in designer jewelry that I recognized from the credit card statements I reviewed every month. Brandon sat swirling expensive bourbon, acting like Lord of the Manor. He always used corporate jargon to make my career sound like a hobby. He endlessly bragged about his recent trip to the Hamptons. My mother smiled proudly at him, passing the cranberry sauce. We are just so blessed to have a strong provider in the family, Helen said, shooting a pointed look in my direction. It is so important for a woman to have a man who can secure her future. Chloe flipped her perfectly styled hair, resting a manicured hand on Brandon's shoulder. Not everyone can attract a high-value man, Mom. Some people are destined to be the quirky single aunt who works constantly just to afford her little apartment. We have to love Maya anyway. I sat listening to the clinking silverware, realizing how blind they were. They believed their lies. They thought Brandon was a financial genius. They thought Chloe was a successful homemaker, and my parents were the righteous owners of the mansion we sat in. I slowly placed my fork down, the metallic clink ringing sharply in the sudden quiet. I looked at Chloe, who was still wearing that smug, satisfied smile. You know, Chloe, I replied, my voice completely steady. Keeping up appearances must be exhausting. It is a good thing you have such a strong provider. Brandon scoffed, adjusting his silk tie. It is called smart investments, Maya. You would understand if you handled real capital instead of managing Instagram accounts for minor celebrities. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my phone, placing it face up on the table. I unlocked the screen, navigating directly to my private banking application. Real capital, Brandon, I asked, tilting my head. Tell me, how exactly does a smart investor afford the lease on a brand new Porsche when he has been unemployed for 6 months? The color drained from Brandon's face instantly. His hand froze halfway to his bourbon glass. Chloe laughed nervously, looking between us. What are you talking about? Brandon is a senior broker. He just got a bonus. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on Brandon. And Mom, I continued, turning to the head of the table where Helen sat, looking confused. I am glad you love this house so much. It really is a beautiful property. I just wish you and Dad had the common courtesy to thank the actual owner instead of insulting her at Thanksgiving dinner. Reverend Thomas finally spoke up, his booming preacher voice echoing in the room. Watch your tone, Maya. This is my house, and you will show respect. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the master control panel of my corporate accounts. No, Dad, I said coldly. This house is owned by my limited liability company. I bought it when the bank was foreclosing on you 5 years ago. I own the house. I pay for the cars. I fund the credit cards you all use to pretend you are rich. You are my dependents, and as of right now, your allowance is permanently cut off. I pressed the red icon on my screen, instantly freezing every secondary card attached to my name, and watched their smug expressions turn to panic. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then the entire dining table erupted into absolute chaos. My mother Helen dropped her silver serving spoon, splashing cranberry sauce across the pristine white tablecloth. She gasped, clutching her pearl necklace as if she were the victim of a physical attack. "You insolent child!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of the dining room. "How dare you speak to your family this way? Apologize to your sister and your brother-in-law right now." Reverend Thomas stood up so quickly, his heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. He pointed a trembling finger at me, channeling his best Sunday pulpit voice. "You will show respect in this house, Maya. You will not disrespect the man of this family, and you certainly will not threaten your mother and me with these ridiculous lies. If you think you can sit at my Thanksgiving table and spew this venom, you are sorely mistaken." I did not flinch. I did not cower the way I had when I was a teenager. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life telling me I was second best to Chloe. "Your house, Dad?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Do you really want to do this right now in front of everyone?" I pulled a folded document from my designer bag and tossed it onto the center of the table right next to the roasted turkey. "That is the deed to this property. It is registered to me. I bought this house for $1.2 million 5 years ago, when the bank was exactly 3 days away from tossing you and Mom out onto the street." Chloe snatched the paper from the table, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. "This has to be fake," she stammered, looking desperately at Brandon. "Maya cannot afford this. She manages social media for local bands. I manage public relations crises for Fortune 500 executives, Chloe." I corrected her smoothly. "My agency billed over $8 million last year. But let us talk about what you can afford. Let us talk about Brandon." I turned my gaze back to my brother-in-law, who was now sweating profusely under his expensive silk collar. "Tell them, Brandon," I challenged him. "Tell them how much your Porsche Panamera lease costs every month. It is $2,400. And that monthly payment is deducted directly from the secondary account I set up for Chloe to buy groceries for my nieces, not luxury German sports cars." Brandon opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His face was blotchy and red. "And Mom." I continued, turning my attention back to Helen, who was staring at the deed in horror. "Did you really think Dad was covering the country club membership fees? That is another $1,500 a month, plus the pool maintenance, the landscaping, the property taxes, and the dog food. I pay for all of it. Every single dime that keeps this fake wealthy image afloat comes from the daughter you just told to eat in the kitchen." "You are lying!" Chloe screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You are just jealous of my marriage. You have always been jealous that I have a husband and you have nothing." "I have nothing," I repeated, laughing softly. "Chloe, you are 32 years old, and you have not paid for your own cell phone bill since you were in college. I am 34, and I own the roof over your head, the car in your driveway, and the food in your mouth. You have a husband who insults the very woman financing his fake, luxurious life." Reverend Thomas slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "Turn those cards back on right now, Maya. I am your father, and I command you to stop this nonsense immediately. We are family, and family supports each other. Support goes both ways, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You only claim me as family when the bills are due." I picked up my phone again, opening the banking application. I had already frozen the accounts, but now I navigated to the permanent cancellation menu. I am not freezing them anymore. I am closing them. I tapped the screen, confirming the permanent closure of all secondary credit lines. Instantly, a buzz vibrated against the mahogany table. Everyone jumped. It was Brandon's phone. He grabbed it frantically. The screen lit up with an automated text message from American Express. "Transaction declined. Your secondary platinum card has been permanently deactivated by the primary account holder." The Thanksgiving massacre had officially begun. Brandon hurled his phone onto the table so hard the screen cracked against the wood. His refined composure completely evaporated. The smug finance broker vanished, replaced by a red-faced, desperate man whose lifeline had just been severed. "Are you insane?" he roared, stepping toward me with fists clenched. "You cannot just cut off our financial access without warning, Maya. We have bills to pay. I have client dinners scheduled. I absolutely need that card for business expenses." "Your business expenses?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I stood up from my chair. "You mean the bar tabs and the luxury golf club fees? You have not closed a single deal in over half a year, Brandon. You have been living off my hard work while openly insulting my career. Those lazy days are over. Go find a real job." Chloe screamed in pure frustration. She grabbed her expensive crystal wine glass and hurled it blindly across the room. It shattered loudly against the mahogany sideboard, sending dark red wine splattering across the pristine white wall. "You are ruining our Thanksgiving," she shrieked hysterically. "You are ruining our entire lives, just because you are a bitter, lonely woman. You have no right to do this to us." I stepped back away from the puddle of wine and calmly picked up my coat from the back of my chair. "I have every right, Chloe," I said, slipping my arms into the warm sleeves. "It is my hard-earned money. I earned it working 12-hour days while you spent your afternoons getting massages and posting fake quotes on social media. You are welcome for the free ride, but the train has officially stopped." My father suddenly stepped directly into my path, his face dark with righteous fury. He dramatically raised his hands as if standing behind his pulpit ready to deliver a sermon of damnation. "Honor thy father and thy mother, Maya," he thundered, his booming voice shaking with intense anger. "The Lord despises a greedy heart. You are selfishly hoarding wealth and deliberately punishing your own flesh and blood. You are turning your back on the beautiful family God graciously gave you. This is a terrible sin of wicked pride." I looked him dead in the eye, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for his transparent hypocrisy. "God also said, 'Thou shalt not steal,' Dad," I replied, my steady voice echoing coldly in the destroyed room. "You and Mom have been continuously stealing my peace of mind for 20 years. You willingly took my money and used it to financially elevate Chloe while constantly putting me down. You loudly preached about honesty every single Sunday while comfortably living in a massive house you do not actually own, completely funded by a dedicated daughter you do not respect. Do not try to weaponize the Bible against me when you are actively breaking half the commandments just to keep up appearances at the country club." Helen stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are walking out on us," she hissed, her dark eyes narrowing viciously. "If you dare walk out that front door right now, Maya, do not ever come back. We will never forgive you for this massive betrayal." I calmly buttoned my dark coat and adjusted my leather handbag over my shoulder. "Good," I said simply. "I am incredibly tired of constantly paying for your fake conditional forgiveness anyway. Enjoy the roasted turkey." I proudly walked past my furious father, past the shattered glass, and past Brandon, who was still staring blankly at his broken phone in absolute disbelief. I quickly opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The door clicked shut firmly behind me, cutting off the chaotic sounds of Chloe sobbing and my angry father aggressively shouting. I walked briskly down the paved driveway toward my parked car, feeling a massive emotional weight magically lift right off my tired shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I was breathing freely. I climbed quickly into my vehicle, started the powerful engine, and pulled smoothly out of the dark gated driveway. As I carefully merged onto the busy main highway, my mobile phone loudly chimed through the digital car audio system. It was a brand new unread voicemail message sent directly from Helen. I quickly pressed play while keeping my eyes firmly fixed on the dark road ahead. Her voice filled the quiet car, dripping with pure, desperate malice. "Maya, you listen to me very carefully," she hissed through the audio speaker. "You are going to immediately log back into that bank account and restore those credit cards right now. If those lines are not active by tomorrow morning, I will completely destroy your entire professional and personal reputation. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The highway stretched out in front of me, illuminated only by the rhythmic flash of streetlights. My phone, sitting securely in the dashboard mount, immediately began vibrating aggressively again. It was a relentless digital assault. The screen lit up over and over, displaying a rapid stream of text messages from everyone left behind at the dining room table. Chloe sent the first barrage. How are we supposed to pay for the private school tuition on Monday, Maya? You are literally ruining your niece's lives. You are a monster. I cannot believe you would do this to innocent children. This was quickly followed by a message from my mother, Helen. You have always been a bitter, jealous girl. Turn the cards back on before I call your clients and tell them how you treat your own elderly parents. I simply watched the notifications slide across the screen, feeling an unfamiliar sense of profound peace. They were finally experiencing the consequences of their own actions. Then came the frantic messages from Brandon. He was trying his absolute best to sound like a sophisticated finance broker again, but his sheer panic was obvious. Maya, you are in direct violation of our verbal financial agreement. I am documenting all of these damages. I will be contacting my legal team first thing in the morning to file a massive lawsuit for financial damages and emotional distress. I highly suggest you reconsider your current course of action before I ruin you in civil court. I actually laughed out loud in the empty car. His legal threats were completely empty. There was no verbal agreement. There was only my generosity, which they had mistaken for an endless obligation. I tapped the voice command button on my leather steering wheel. Call Marcus at Platinum Concierge, I instructed the car audio system. The mobile phone dialed and rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Good evening, Maya. This is Marcus from Platinum Client Services. How can I assist you tonight? Hi, Marcus, I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. I used the automated system earlier to close all the secondary cards attached to my primary account, but I need to make absolutely sure the action is permanent. I want zero possibility of those credit lines being reopened or any emergency override charges being approved under any circumstances. I can certainly handle that for you, Maya, Marcus said. I could hear his computer keyboard clicking rapidly in the quiet background. I see the 4 secondary cards right here. 2 belonging to a Chloe and Brandon, and 2 belonging to a Thomas and Helen. You want a permanent hard closure on all 4 lines. Correct. That is exactly correct, Marcus. I confirmed. I also need you to put a strict security freeze on the main account right now. If anyone calls claiming to be my spouse or my parents, asking for access or emergency funds, deny them immediately. Require my personal voice verification for any future changes. Understood? Maya, Marcus, replied, his tone remaining perfectly neutral and highly professional. The hard closures are complete, and the strict security freeze is now fully active on your profile. Is there absolutely anything else you need tonight? No, Marcus. That is everything I said. Thank you for your prompt help. I ended the call feeling an immense emotional weight finally lift from my chest. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed forever. They could no longer secretly drain my hard-earned bank accounts to comfortably fund their extravagant fake lives. I turned on the radio, letting smooth jazz fill the quiet space of the car cabin. For the next 10 minutes, the angry text messages finally slowed down. I assumed they were busy fighting among themselves or frantically trying to figure out how to pay the massive Thanksgiving catering bill I had left sitting on the mahogany table. I pulled off the highway exit, smoothly approaching the quiet downtown streets, leading directly to my luxury apartment building. The dashboard clock glowed brightly, showing it was just past 9. The night was still young, but I felt incredibly energized and completely unstoppable. I was finally truly free from them. Just as I turned onto my street, my phone vibrated with a different kind of notification. It was a social media alert. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. The banner read, Reverend Thomas has just gone live on Facebook. I pulled my car over to the side of the road and parked. I tapped the notification opening the application. The screen loaded to show my father weeping openly to his massive church congregation about a sudden violent demonic attack striking our helpless family. I watched my father wipe fake tears on the screen as he preached to viewers online about a spiritual attack on our household. I simply rolled my eyes, closed the application, and drove home. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed. I put on my sharpest designer suit, grabbed my briefcase, and headed straight to my public relations firm in downtown Atlanta. Walking into my sleek corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I felt completely in control. My business was thriving, and for the first time my personal finances were entirely my own. I had barely sat down at my glass desk and opened my laptop when my office phone rang loudly. It was my direct private line. Only a handful of people had that specific number. I picked up the receiver expecting a high-profile client. Instead, my mother Helen's voice barked aggressively through the speaker, completely bypassing any normal greeting. "You need to transfer $12,000 to the Oak Ridge Academy immediately, Maya," she demanded, her tone laced with absolute entitlement. "Today is the absolute final deadline for the winter semester tuition for your nieces. If the money is not in their account by noon, they will be officially disenrolled and sent home. Chloe is completely beside herself with worry, and you are the one responsible for this mess." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I replied, my voice dripping with cold sarcasm. "And no, I will not be transferring a single dime to that overpriced private school. Chloe and Brandon are the parents. They are solely responsible for their own children. Maybe Brandon can ask his fancy golf buddies for a short-term loan since he is such a successful finance broker." Helen gasped, loudly, acting deeply offended. "How can you be so incredibly heartless?" she shrieked, her voice vibrating with genuine rage. "Those innocent little girls did absolutely nothing to you, Maya. You are maliciously punishing helpless children just because you are jealous of your sister. You have a massive company and millions of dollars. You do not even have a husband or a family of your own to spend it on. It is your fundamental duty to help provide for your flesh and blood." I felt a cold, sharp anger rise in my chest, but I kept my voice perfectly level. Jealous of Chloe, I asked, laughing bitterly. "Mom, let us get one thing perfectly straight right now. I am not jealous of a grown woman who cannot even afford her own groceries. I am not jealous of a marriage built on lies and stolen money. And I am certainly not punishing those children. Their own lazy parents are punishing them by living light years beyond their actual means." "You are a selfish, greedy girl," Helen hissed violently. "We raised you to share your blessings. We gave you everything. You gave me absolutely nothing." I snapped back, cutting her off completely. "You gave Chloe everything. You paid for her college tuition, while I worked 3 jobs to put myself through state school. You bought her a brand new car for graduation, while I rode the city bus for 5 years. You and Dad constantly told me I was not smart enough or pretty enough to succeed. You made me the invisible child. But the second I built this massive company from the ground up and bought the house you live in, suddenly I became the family bank. Your blatant favoritism is incredibly toxic, Mom. You created a spoiled, dependent monster in Chloe, and now you expect me to financially sustain her forever. Well, the bank is permanently closed." There was a heavy silence on the line. I could hear her breathing heavily, struggling to process the absolute truth I had just dropped on her. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking with an ugly, hateful venom. "You listen to me, you arrogant, ungrateful witch!" she screamed, the volume forcing me to pull the phone slightly away from my ear. "You are no longer a part of this family. You are completely dead to me, Maya. Do you hear me? You are dead." She slammed the phone down violently, severing the connection. I slowly placed my receiver back on the base, taking a deep, steadying breath. I had expected the harsh words, but hearing my own mother declare me dead still stung slightly. However, before I could even process the emotional weight of the brutal phone call, the heavy glass door to my private office suddenly swung open. My executive assistant Sarah rushed into the room looking absolutely terrified, clutching an iPad tightly to her chest. Sarah rushed into the room looking terrified, clutching an iPad tightly to her chest. "Maya, what is happening?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Our company's social media pages are under a coordinated attack. We are losing followers by the minute, and the review sections are flooded with hateful comments." I quickly stood up and took the device from her shaking hands. My eyes scanned the screen and my blood ran cold. My father had not gone live on his personal profile last night. He had broadcast his morning sermon directly to the official church page, which boasted over 50,000 devoted local followers. The video clip was already viral within our community. There stood Reverend Thomas, dramatically wiping his face with a white handkerchief, preaching about the spiritual decay of the independent woman. He never explicitly said my full name, but he painted a vivid picture of a daughter consumed by corporate greed, abandoning her loving family out of spite. He called upon the congregation to pray for my wicked soul and to reject the businesses of those who turned their backs on the Lord and their hardworking parents. The faithful followers took his words as a direct command to go to holy war. I scrolled through the public reviews on my professional agency profile. Within the last hour, over 200 one-star ratings had appeared out of nowhere. The comments were incredibly vicious and personal. One frequent churchgoer named Sister Margaret wrote, "Do not trust this Jezebel with your business, because she is a heartless monster who starves her own nieces." Another prominent elder from the adult choir commented, "This company is funded by demonic greed and disrespect for religious elders. They were systematically trying to destroy the professional reputation I had spent the last decade building from the ground up." My office phone began ringing again, but this time, it was not my mother. Sarah pointed to the flashing red lights on the main switchboard. "Every incoming line is occupied, Maya," she said, looking overwhelmed. "They are all calling from the local church directory." I pressed the speaker button on the nearest flashing line. A deep, gravelly voice filled my pristine office. "Maya, this is Deacon Wallace," the man growled angrily. "We are absolutely disgusted by your recent behavior. You need to get on your knees and beg your father for forgiveness before God strikes you down." I calmly reached over and disconnected the call without saying a single word. I am a trained crisis management executive. I have successfully handled international public relations disasters for multi-billion-dollar corporations. I was not going to let a local church congregation bully me into financial submission. "Sarah," I commanded, my voice dropping into my professional crisis mode, "lock down all public comments on our corporate social media platforms immediately. Do not delete the existing negative reviews, just hide them from public view. For now, I want you to screenshot every single defamatory comment, especially the ones mentioning my nieces or my financial status. Put them all directly into a secure digital file. We are going to need them for the legal team later." Sarah nodded, her panic subsiding as she recognized my sudden shift in leadership demeanor. "Yes, Maya." Right away, she replied, hurrying back to her desk outside my door. I sat back down at my glass desk and pulled out a fresh legal notepad. I needed to act swiftly before this smear campaign officially reached my corporate clients. My father was playing a dirty, dangerous game, leveraging his spiritual authority to financially blackmail me. He thought public shame would break my strong spirit. He fundamentally misunderstood exactly who I had become. I spent the next 45 minutes meticulously drafting a strategic press statement. I was not going to attack the beloved church directly, but I was going to legally protect my business assets from targeted, organized defamation. Just as I finished typing the final assertive sentence, my private cellular phone vibrated loudly on the glass desk. I glanced at the caller identification and felt a sudden sharp knot form tightly in my stomach. It was Marcus Thorne, the highly respected chief executive officer of a massive technology firm and my highest-paying corporate client. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing a bright professional tone into my voice. "Good morning, Marcus," I answered smoothly. "Maya," he said, his tone uncharacteristically serious, bypassing our usual friendly morning banter. "I am currently looking at a very disturbing viral online video link that my diligent executive assistant just forwarded directly to me. Can you please explain to me exactly why Reverend Thomas is publicly praying for your wicked soul on the internet, and why my company name is currently being tagged aggressively in the chaotic comment section?" "Marcus, I understand your concern," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The situation is a private family dispute that my father made public to his congregation. He is attempting to use public pressure to force a financial arrangement I have firmly declined. I assure you my agency has implemented a containment strategy. We are hiding the defamatory comments, and my legal team is preparing a formal cease and desist right now. Your company is targeted because you are my prominent client. I will personally ensure your brand is shielded from this local drama." Marcus was silent before letting out a soft chuckle. "Maya, I hired you because you are the most effective crisis manager in the Southeast," he replied, his tone relaxing. "If anyone can handle a rogue preacher, it is you. Just keep my corporate name out of the mud, and let me know if you need recommendations for a good defamation lawyer." I thanked Marcus and ended the call, feeling a surge of triumph. I successfully neutralized the biggest threat to my business. But before I could take a sip of coffee, the intercom on my desk buzzed loudly. It was Sarah, her voice laced with fresh panic. "Maya, your brother-in-law. Brandon is in the main lobby, aggressively demanding to see you, and threatening to cause a massive scene if I do not let him through the security doors." "Keep him right there, Sarah," I instructed, standing up. "Do not let him into the inner office. I am coming out to handle this personally." I walked straight out of my private office and strode confidently toward the glass reception area. I pushed through the double doors to find Brandon pacing aggressively across the marble floor. He wore a slightly wrinkled suit and carried a leather briefcase, trying his best to look like a powerful executive. Instead, he just looked sweaty and desperate. When he saw me, he immediately puffed out his chest and marched right up to the reception desk, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. "You have exactly 5 minutes to fix this catastrophic mistake, Maya," he barked loudly enough for my front office staff to hear. "You are officially in breach of a binding verbal contract. You established a long-term pattern of financial support our family has legally relied upon. By cutting off those funds without written notice, you have caused severe reliance damages. I already drafted the initial paperwork for a civil lawsuit. I suggest you reinstate the credit cards before I take everything you own." I stood completely still and looked at him. My face remained entirely blank. I did not flinch. I just let his fake legal jargon hang awkwardly in the quiet lobby. Several of my employees were openly staring at us. I slowly crossed my arms over my chest and let out a loud, genuine laugh. It echoed brightly against the marble walls. "Reliance damages?" I asked, repeating the phrase mockingly. "Brandon, did you spend your entire morning searching legal terms on the internet trying to find a way to sound intelligent? A verbal contract requires mutual consideration. What exactly did you provide me in exchange for paying your luxury car lease?" "Nothing. You are an unemployed fraud who spent the last 6 months pretending to go to an office while secretly draining my bank account to fund your pathetic gambling habits. You have absolutely no legal standing, and you do not have the money to hire a real lawyer to even file that imaginary paperwork." Brandon turned a deep shade of crimson. His white male privilege was completely failing him in a room where I held all the actual power. He took a sudden aggressive step toward me, raising his voice into a furious shout. "You listen to me, you arrogant little witch!" Before he could finish the sentence, my 2 massive building security guards stepped smoothly out of the nearby elevator bay. They flanked Brandon, immediately grabbing him firmly by both of his arms. "Sir, it is time for you to leave the premises," the taller guard stated calmly but forcefully. I smiled warmly at Brandon as the two guards began to physically drag him backward toward the sliding glass exit doors. "Enjoy the long walk home, Brandon," I called out cheerfully. "I heard your luxury car lease is getting canceled today." Brandon struggled against the guards, but his physical resistance was completely useless. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. But right before the heavy glass doors slid shut, his angry expression suddenly morphed into a chilling, triumphant smirk. "You can just laugh all you want, Maya," he shouted loudly over his shoulder. "I already made a little phone call this morning that is going to completely destroy your entire life." I watched Brandon disappear into the busy downtown street, feeling a brief moment of satisfaction before returning to my glass desk. His dramatic parting threat about making a phone call echoed slightly in my mind, but I quickly dismissed it as the desperate blustering of a cornered man. I had a massive public relations firm to run and real corporate crises to manage. The online church mob was still actively posting, but my technical team had successfully hidden the worst of the defamatory comments. I was just starting to review the draft of my official legal cease and desist letter when Sarah knocked sharply on my doorframe. Her face was completely pale and her hands were visibly shaking. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There are two uniformed Atlanta police officers in the reception area. They are accompanied by a woman who says she is an investigator from Adult Protective Services. They are demanding to speak with you immediately regarding a felony complaint." My stomach dropped instantly. Brandon had not been bluffing after all. I stood up, smoothing the front of my designer suit, and walked deliberately toward the lobby. I was not going to let my staff see me sweat. I pushed through the glass doors and approached the trio waiting near the reception desk. "Good morning, officers," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even and respectful. "I am Maya, the owner of this firm. How can I help you today?" The woman standing between the two officers stepped forward. She wore a severe gray suit and held a thick manila folder. "Ms. Maya, my name is Agent Higgins with Georgia Adult Protective Services," she stated coldly. "We received a highly disturbing emergency report this morning regarding your elderly parents, Reverend Thomas and Helen. You are officially under investigation for severe elder financial abuse." I stared at her, completely stunned. "Elder financial abuse?" I repeated the words, tasting bitter in my mouth. "Agent Higgins, there must be a massive misunderstanding. I have been financially supporting my parents for over 5 years. I have never taken a single dime from them." Agent Higgins opened her folder and pulled out a formal complaint document. "According to the detailed report filed by your brother-in-law Brandon, you recently froze all of their bank accounts and credit lines, leaving them completely destitute and unable to purchase food or vital medications. The report also alleges that you fraudulently transferred the deed of their primary residence into a shell company that you secretly control." I let out a harsh laugh of sheer disbelief. "Brandon filed a retaliatory false report because I cut off his free ride," I explained, gesturing toward my private conference room. "Please step into my office, Agent Higgins. I can clear this up in exactly 5 minutes." The officers and the investigator followed me into the secure room. I immediately pulled up my private banking dashboard on the large presentation screen. I showed them the complete financial history. "Look right here," I said, pointing to the digital ledger. "These accounts were never their life savings. These are secondary credit lines strictly attached to my primary corporate account. The money flows directly from my business revenue to them." I also pulled up the original foreclosure documents from 5 years ago, proving my parents were bankrupt before I stepped in and legally purchased the property to save them from eviction. Agent Higgins carefully reviewed the glowing digital documents and the property deed. The physical evidence was absolutely undeniable. "I am the sole provider for that entire family," I stated firmly, crossing my arms. "I simply decided to stop funding their luxurious lifestyle yesterday. There is absolutely no elder abuse happening here. In fact, I am the one being financially abused by my capable adult relatives." I expected Agent Higgins to immediately apologize and close the ridiculous file. Instead, her expression remained incredibly grim. She slowly pulled a second document from her thick manila folder and placed it deliberately on the glass conference table. The financial trail you just provided is certainly compelling, Maya Agent Higgins said, her voice dropping to a very serious tone. However, this situation is far more complicated than simple credit card disputes. This piece of paper is a sworn legal affidavit signed in the presence of a notary public just 2 hours ago. I looked down at the document. My heart began to pound violently against my ribs. "What is that?" I asked, my voice suddenly feeling very tight. "It is a sworn statement signed by both of your parents," Agent Higgins replied, looking me directly in the eye. "They are officially claiming that you used emotional manipulation and corporate intimidation to coerce them into signing away their house. They are pressing formal criminal charges against you." I stared at the sworn affidavit resting on the glass conference table. The signatures of my parents, Reverend Thomas and Helen, stared back at me, written in stark black ink. They were actually trying to send me to prison to protect Brandon and his fake lifestyle. A cold, blinding fury washed over me, completely replacing any lingering trace of familial obligation. I looked up at Agent Higgins, who was watching me closely, waiting for a panicked reaction. I did not give her one. "Agent Higgins," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "You have my financial records and the original property deed. If my parents truly believe I coerced them, they can attempt to prove it in a court of law. However, from this moment forward, you will direct all further communications to my legal counsel. You can find his contact information at the front desk on your way out. Have a pleasant afternoon." I stood up, ending the meeting. The two police officers exchanged a glance, but without a warrant or immediate physical evidence of a crime, they had absolutely no authority to arrest me. Agent Higgins pursed her lips, gathered her manila folder, and silently led the officers out of my office. The moment the heavy glass doors clicked shut behind them, my executive assistant Sarah rushed back in. "Maya, what just happened?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" "I am perfectly fine, Sarah," I replied, walking briskly back to my desk. "In fact, I have never been thinking more clearly. I need you to cancel all of my afternoon meetings. Then I need you to pull up the encrypted contact file and get Elias Stone on the secure line." Sarah gasped softly. Elias Stone was the most ruthless private investigator in Atlanta. Our agency only retained him for the most catastrophic corporate espionage cases. He was incredibly expensive and notoriously thorough. "Are you absolutely sure, Maya?" she asked. "Get him on the phone right now," I commanded. Within 2 minutes, my secure desk line chimed. I picked up the receiver. "Maya, what kind of disaster requires my services today?" Elias asked, his deep voice crackling slightly over the encrypted connection. "I need a complete financial and personal excavation, Elias," I stated, pacing behind my desk. "I need you to dig into my brother-in-law, Brandon. He claims to be a senior finance broker, but I know he was fired 6 months ago. I want his bank records, his credit history, his phone logs, and his daily movements. I want to know exactly where every single dime he has touched in the last year went." "Consider it done," Elias replied, typing rapidly in the background. "Is there a secondary target?" "Yes," I said, my eyes narrowing as I looked out over the Atlanta skyline. "I also need you to discreetly audit the financial accounts of my father church. Reverend Thomas runs a massive congregation with a highly lucrative nonprofit tax exemption. Brandon has always been heavily involved in the church financial planning committee. My family just escalated a petty financial dispute into a fraudulent criminal investigation. I need the absolute worst leverage you can find, and I need it yesterday. I will put my entire team on it right now," Elias promised. "I will call you the second I find the loose thread." I hung up the phone, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. My parents had officially declared war. They thought they could use the police and the church congregation to force me into submission. They thought my success made me a soft target. They forgot that I made my living destroying the reputations of billionaires who stepped out of line. I spent the next several hours pacing my office, reviewing my own financial firewalls, and preparing my corporate lawyers for the incoming legal battle. I refused to let my family tear down the empire I had built. The afternoon stretched on, filled with tense anticipation. The online attacks from the church members continued to roll in, but they felt entirely insignificant now. I was hunting for much bigger prey. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my private line rang again. It had only been 4 hours since I hired him. I snatched the receiver off the base. "Tell me what you found, Elias," I demanded immediately. Elias let out a low whistle over the line. "Maya, you are not going to believe what I am looking at," he said, his voice laced with genuine disbelief. "Your brother-in-law, Brandon, is not just broke and unemployed. He has been actively committing massive federal wire fraud. And worse, he has been illegally using your father church tax identification number to completely launder the stolen money." I sat completely frozen in my ergonomic chair, staring at the phone receiver in my hand. "Did you just say federal wire fraud?" I asked Elias, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Maya Elias confirmed, sounding entirely professional despite the massive bombshell he just dropped. "Brandon has been siphoning money from vulnerable client portfolios for over a year. When he got fired, they quietly let him go to avoid a massive public scandal, but they demanded full restitution. To pay them back, he started funneling his illegal gambling debts through your father nonprofit church, accounts hiding the dirty money behind the religious tax exemption status." I instructed Elias to compile every single piece of evidence into a secure digital dossier and ended the call. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from absolute vindication. They had tried to destroy my life with a fake police report while actively running a federal criminal enterprise. I slept incredibly well that night. The following morning was a bright, beautiful Saturday. I was sitting comfortably on the plush velvet sofa in my luxury penthouse, sipping a hot matcha latte, when my personal cell phone suddenly chimed. It was an automated motion detection alert from the Ring doorbell camera installed at Chloe and Brandon's suburban house. I had completely forgotten that my email address was still registered as the primary administrative account, because I was the one who originally purchased and installed the security system for them 3 years ago. Curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the notification and opened the live video feed. The high-definition camera provided a perfect wide-angle view of their manicured front lawn and the wide concrete driveway. Chloe was currently hosting her monthly neighborhood brunch. Several wealthy-looking women wearing expensive pastel sundresses and oversized designer sunglasses were gathered on the spacious front porch, holding crystal champagne flutes filled with expensive mimosas. Chloe was standing in the center of the group, laughing loudly and gesturing dramatically, clearly holding court among her snooty suburban friends. She looked perfectly content living her fake life. Then a massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck turned aggressively onto their quiet residential street. The loud, rumbling diesel engine completely drowned out the polite chatter on the porch. The truck backed swiftly into the driveway, stopping inches away from Brandon's pristine silver Porsche Panamera. The women on the porch fell dead silent. Chloe dropped her champagne flute, allowing it to shatter loudly against the porch floorboards. A large, burly man wearing a neon yellow safety vest jumped down from the truck cabin holding a thick metal clipboard. Brandon suddenly burst through the heavy wooden front door, sprinting down the driveway, wearing silk pajamas and expensive leather slippers. "Hey, you cannot do this!" he yelled, frantically waving his arms. "I am making the payment on Monday." The tow truck driver did not even bother to look at him. He calmly walked to the back of the flatbed and engaged the loud hydraulic winch. "Save it for the bank, buddy," the driver shouted over the mechanical noise. "Your lease is officially in default. You are 4 months behind and the primary financier canceled the emergency backup card yesterday. Step away from the vehicle." I watched the live feed in absolute fascination as the heavy steel hooks were efficiently attached to the undercarriage of the luxury sports car. Brandon desperately tried to argue, but the driver completely ignored him. The women on the porch began whispering furiously to each other, clearly scandalized by the brutal public display of financial ruin. Chloe stood completely frozen, her face turning a bright, unnatural shade of red, as she watched her carefully constructed wealthy neighborhood reputation evaporate into thin air. The loud winch pulled the expensive silver car slowly up the steep metal ramp. Within 3 minutes, the tow truck secured the vehicle and drove away, leaving Brandon standing barefoot in the empty driveway while Chloe's snooty friends awkwardly gathered their designer purses and began speed-walking toward their own vehicles. The brunch was officially over. I smiled, taking another slow sip of my warm matcha latte. I gently closed the security application, feeling an immense wave of satisfaction wash over me. Exactly 30 seconds later, my cell phone began ringing frantically. The caller identification displayed Chloe's name. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Maya, please, you have to help me." Chloe sobbed hysterically into the receiver, her voice breaking with genuine panic. "My entire social life is completely over. Everyone saw the repo man take the car away today. Please just wire me $10,000 right now so I can get it back before Monday morning. I am begging you." I held the phone slightly away from my ear as Chloe continued to sob loudly. Her desperation was incredibly thick, but I felt absolutely no sympathy for her. $10,000, I repeated, keeping my voice completely calm and entirely devoid of emotion. "Chloe, do you honestly hear yourself right now? You just watched a tow truck physically repossess your husband's luxury car because neither of you have bothered to hold down a real job or pay a single bill in months. And your first instinct is to call the sister you publicly mocked just 2 days ago to demand a massive cash bailout so you can save face in front of your neighborhood friends. The absolute sheer audacity is actually quite impressive. Maya, please stop lecturing me," Chloe cried, her voice rising an octave in sheer panic. "You have millions in your corporate accounts. $10,000 is absolutely nothing to you. It is pocket change. If you do not wire the money right now, my entire reputation in this community will be completely destroyed." Everyone saw the truck pull away. I cannot show my face at the country club ever again. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "You are right, Chloe," I said softly. $10,000 is pocket change to me. But I would rather burn those dollar bills in my fireplace than send a single cent to the people who actively tried to send me to federal prison yesterday. The line went dead silent. The sound of Chloe crying instantly stopped, replaced by a heavy, tense pause. "I know everything, Chloe," I continued, my voice turning cold and sharp. "I know all about the emergency police visit to my office. I know about the investigator from Adult Protective Services. I know that you and Brandon marched right down to the precinct and convinced Mom and Dad to sign a sworn legal affidavit falsely accusing me of criminal elder financial abuse. You actually tried to have me arrested for stealing the house that I bought with my own hard-earned money to save them from homelessness." Chloe hesitated for only a brief second before her tone completely shifted. The pathetic sobbing vanished instantly, replaced by a harsh, defensive anger. "Well, you completely forced us to do it, Maya," she snapped viciously. "You left us absolutely no choice. You maliciously cut off our financial access without any warning. You abandoned your own family. We had to take drastic measures to protect ourselves and get our rightful money back. You are a selfish monster who only cares about her precious company. We simply told the authorities what they needed to hear to fix the terrible situation you selfishly created." I let out a harsh laugh of sheer disbelief. "You committed perjury, Chloe," I stated firmly. "You filed a false police report and coerced our parents into signing fraudulent legal documents. That is a massive felony, and for what exactly? For to protect a lazy husband who cannot even afford the lease on a rented sports car. You are living in a complete delusion. Your perfect wealthy life is an absolute lie, and now the entire neighborhood knows it. The police cannot force me to give you my money. No one can save you from your own terrible choices. You are just incredibly jealous of me," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the phone speaker. "You have always been jealous of my beautiful family and my perfect life. You are a bitter, lonely woman, and you are trying to destroy my happiness because nobody will ever love you. Your perfect life is being towed down the interstate right now, I replied coldly. My life is secure, my company is thriving, my house is paid for. I am not the one begging for a $10,000 wire transfer on a Saturday morning to impress people who do not even like me. You made your bed, Chloe, and now you and your fake finance broker husband are going to lie in it. Do not ever call this number again. Before I could pull the phone away to end the call, I heard a sudden violent scuffle on the other end of the line. Chloe let out a surprised yelp, followed by the sound of the phone being aggressively snatched from her hands. Heavy, angry breathing filled the speaker. "Listen to me very carefully, you arrogant little witch," Brandon snarled into the receiver. His voice was shaking with an uncontrolled, explosive rage. "You think you hold all the cards just because your name is on the bank accounts? You think you can completely humiliate me in my own driveway and get away with it? I am going to successfully sue you for my massive sweat equity in your precious company today, Maya." I listened to Brandon screaming through the phone speaker and let out a soft chuckle. "Sweat equity," I repeated slowly, making sure he heard the amusement in my voice. "Brandon, you have not broken a sweat in your entire life, unless it was walking from the expensive couch to the luxury refrigerator. Go ahead and call a lawyer. Let me know how you plan to pay the massive retainer fee without my money." I ended the call before he could scream another word and tossed my phone onto the plush velvet sofa. My morning was already incredibly productive, but it was about to get much better. Exactly 10 minutes later, my building concierge called up to announce a special delivery. A bonded courier arrived at my penthouse door carrying a heavy encrypted hard drive from my private investigator, Elias. I took the package, thanked the courier, and immediately walked over to my home office. I plugged the drive into my secure computer and entered the complex passcode Elias had provided. The screen flickered to life, revealing a massive organized directory of digital files. I opened the main summary document and began to eagerly read. Elias was definitely worth every single penny I paid him. The comprehensive dossier detailed the complete and absolute destruction of Brandon. He had not just been fired from his finance firm 6 months ago, as I initially suspected. He was actually permanently terminated exactly 8 months ago. The firm discovered he was illegally skimming small amounts from his wealthiest elderly clients to cover his massive mounting gambling debts. They quietly forced his immediate resignation and firmly demanded full restitution under the strict threat of federal prosecution. That was the exact devastating moment he began heavily leaning on my secondary credit lines. He used the generous monthly allowance I provided for my nieces to aggressively play high-stakes online poker and place massive bets on offshore sportsbooks. The detailed financial ledgers Elias recovered showed hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing directly from my corporate accounts through the church nonprofit tax identification number and straight into the pockets of illegal bookies. Brandon was not just a lazy husband, he was a desperate, completely reckless criminal who had actively jeopardized his own freedom and my parents' church to fund his pathetic addiction. But the financial ruin was not even the most shocking part of the detailed report. I clicked on a subfolder labeled Personal Surveillance, and a series of high-resolution photographs filled my computer screen. My jaw tightened as I scrolled through the images. Brandon was sitting comfortably in a dimly lit high-end steakhouse. He was not eating alone. A young, stunningly beautiful blonde woman was sitting directly across from him. She was laughing brightly, leaning over the small table to intimately hold his hand. The next photograph showed the two of them walking closely together into a luxury downtown hotel. The timestamp on the image was from just last week. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The exact same afternoon Chloe had texted me complaining that Brandon was working incredibly long hours at the brokerage firm. I opened the attached background check on the young woman. Her name was Jessica. She was a 24-year-old cocktail waitress who lived in a high-rise apartment. According to the financial documents Elias pulled, Brandon was currently fully paying her expensive monthly rent. He was literally using my hard-earned money to fund a secret apartment for his young mistress, while his own clueless wife was actively begging me for a $10,000 wire transfer to save her fake country club reputation. I sat back in my leather office chair, staring at the damning photographs on my glowing screen. A cold, calculating sense of pure focus washed completely over me. My family thought they were playing a simple game of emotional manipulation and social guilt. They thought they could leverage public shame and fake police reports to force my hand. They had absolutely no idea they were standing on a massive, fragile house of cards completely built on lies, theft, and infidelity. I was not just going to defend myself against their pathetic attacks anymore. I was going to burn their entire fake reality completely to the ground. I turned to my heavy-duty laser printer and pressed the print command. The machine hummed loudly, springing to life. I printed every single offshore gambling receipt, every illegal wire transfer document, and every single crystal-clear photograph of Brandon and his young mistress entering the hotel. I gathered the stack of warm printed papers, organizing them perfectly. I walked over to my tall wooden filing cabinet and pulled out a sleek red folder. I neatly slipped the devastating physical evidence inside and snapped the folder shut. I placed my hand firmly on the sleek red folder and pressed the intercom button on my glass desk. "Sarah," I instructed, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I need you to call my parents right now. Tell them I am ready to discuss a final financial settlement and they need to come to my office immediately. Tell them to come alone." I released the button and waited. Less than an hour later, the heavy glass doors to my private office swung open. My mother Helen walked in first, wearing an expensive tailored suit I had paid for last season. She held her designer handbag high, her chin tilted upward in an incredibly arrogant display of unearned victory. My father, Reverend Thomas, followed closely behind her. He walked with the slow, deliberate strut of a man who firmly believed his divine authority had successfully crushed a rebellion. They took their seats in the leather chairs across from my desk. Neither of them said a word. They were clearly waiting for me to grovel. They expected a tearful apology for my terrible behavior and a massive cashier check to magically fix Chloe's ruined weekend. They truly believed I was weak enough to cave under their immense and completely ridiculous family pressure. I remained perfectly still in my ergonomic chair. I did not offer them anything to drink. I did not ask about their day. Well, Maya Helen finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice dripped with condescending superiority. "We are waiting. I sincerely hope you brought us here to make this right. Your sister is absolutely devastated about the car and the neighborhood humiliation. You caused a massive scene and forced us to take drastic legal measures. But your father and I are willing to graciously drop the criminal complaint with Adult Protective Services if you apologize right now and immediately reinstate every single financial account. We also expect a separate wire transfer to completely cover the emotional distress you intentionally caused our family." I looked at the two people who raised me. The sheer entitlement radiating from them was genuinely breathtaking. I slowly picked up the sleek red folder resting on my desk. "You completely misunderstood why I called you here today, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "I did not invite you here to apologize. I invited you here to inform you that you bet your entire future on the wrong horse." I slid the bright red folder smoothly across the polished glass surface of my desk. It stopped perfectly right in front of my father. "I highly suggest you open that, Dad," I instructed, leaning back in my chair. "And I suggest you look at every single page very carefully before you ever threaten me with a fake police report again." Reverend Thomas scoffed loudly, clearly irritated by my absolute lack of submission. He reached out with a heavy hand and flipped open the red cover. Helen leaned over his shoulder, ready to loudly dismiss whatever she thought I was trying to show them. Their arrogant expressions lasted for exactly 5 seconds. The very first page was a high-resolution photograph of Brandon kissing his young cocktail waitress mistress outside the luxury hotel. Helen gasped sharply, her hand flying to her mouth in genuine shock. Reverend Thomas quickly flipped to the next page, revealing the detailed residential lease agreement Brandon had signed for the young woman paid entirely through my secondary credit line. Then came the extensive offshore gambling ledgers, showing hundreds of thousands of dollars lost in a matter of months. But I was not watching Helen react to the devastating infidelity. I was watching my father. As Reverend Thomas reached the final section of the thick dossier, his hands began to visibly shake. These pages contained the undeniable federal banking records proving Brandon was fired for embezzlement. And most importantly, the documents clearly showed exactly how Brandon used the sacred nonprofit tax identification number of the church to funnel his stolen money and pay his illegal bookies. I expected my father to explode with righteous fury. I expected him to scream about Brandon betraying Chloe and dragging his holy church into a massive gambling scandal, but that did not happen. Reverend Thomas did not look angry. He looked completely and utterly terrified. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick old man. He stared at the church wire transfers with wide, panicked eyes, and a cold, horrifying realization suddenly washed over me. Brandon had not stolen the church tax identification number without permission. My father actually knew exactly what was happening all along. He was actively participating in the federal wire fraud to take a secret cut of the dirty gambling money. "You knew," I said, staring directly into my father's terrified eyes. "You knew exactly what he was doing, and you helped him launder the stolen money through your own church. You took a cut of the embezzlement to fund your country club fees while preaching about honesty every single Sunday." Reverend Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked down at the documents, his hands trembling violently. "It was not like that, Maya," he finally stammered, his voice reduced to a pathetic whisper. "Brandon told me it was a legitimate investment return. He said he wanted to bless the congregation with anonymous donations. I just processed the paperwork. I did not know it was stolen from his firm." "You are a liar," I snapped, hitting the glass desk with the palm of my hand. "You are a complete fraud, Dad. The dates on these transfers align perfectly with the exact months you paid off your luxury car loans. You knew the money was dirty, and you simply looked the other way." I expected my mother to erupt in righteous fury. I expected Helen to grab the photographs of Brandon kissing his young mistress and storm out of the office to protect her precious golden child, Chloe. Instead, Helen calmly reached across the desk and closed the red folder. She did not look angry at all. She looked incredibly annoyed. "All right, Maya," Helen said, smoothing the fabric of her designer skirt. "So Brandon made a few terrible financial mistakes and had a silly little fling. Men are weak when they are under severe stress, and you have to admit you have put him under a massive amount of pressure lately by constantly questioning his authority as the man of the house." I stared at her, stunned by her twisted logic. "He embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars, Mom," I said, my voice rising in sheer disbelief. "He is facing federal prison. He is currently using my money to pay rent for a 24-year-old mistress, while Chloe is begging me for cash to save her fake neighborhood reputation. And you are actively blaming me for his stress." Helen waved her manicured hand dismissively, as if I had just brought up a minor scheduling conflict. "Chloe cannot find out about any of this, Maya," she stated, her tone turning cold and authoritative. "A divorce would completely destroy her social standing. And if this financial church issue gets out, it will ruin your father's pristine reputation in the community. We have spent decades building our perfect family image, and I will not let you tear it down just because you are holding a petty grudge." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "A petty grudge," I repeated. "Mom, he committed a massive federal crime, which is exactly why you are going to fix it," Helen interrupted, leaning forward and pointing a sharp finger at me. "You are a professional crisis manager, Maya. This is exactly what you do for a living. You are going to pay off Brandon's old firm so they do not press criminal charges. Then you are going to write a massive check to that little blonde girl and force her to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will make all of this completely disappear today. You will protect your sister's marriage, and you will protect this family." I looked from my mother, who was demanding I cover up a federal felony, to my father, who was silently cowering in his expensive leather chair. In that exact moment, the final lingering thread of familial obligation completely snapped inside my chest. I finally saw them for exactly who they were. They were not just toxic or misguided, they were utterly irredeemable. They would happily sacrifice my money, my freedom, and my sanity just to keep up their pathetic fake appearances. They did not love me. They only loved what I could forcefully provide to protect their fragile egos. I slowly stood up from my ergonomic chair, buttoning my designer jacket. "No," I said, my voice vibrating with absolute finality. "I am not fixing anything. I am not paying off his firm, and I am not paying off his young mistress. I am going to sit right here in my beautiful office and watch your entire fake world completely burn to the ground." Helen stood up, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. "You selfish, ungrateful witch," she hissed violently. "If you do not fix this, I will personally make sure everyone in Atlanta knows exactly how you abandoned us." "Get out of my office," I commanded, pointing at the heavy glass doors. "Both of you get out before I call building security and have you dragged into the street." My mother Helen shot me one final venomous glare before turning sharply on her expensive designer heels. She marched out of my private office with her head held high, completely refusing to acknowledge the massive criminal reality I had just exposed. Reverend Thomas practically scrambled after her, looking like a terrified shadow of the powerful preacher he pretended to be on Sunday mornings. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, leaving me standing alone in the quiet hum of my executive suite. I sank slowly back into my ergonomic leather chair, feeling an intense mixture of sheer exhaustion and absolute clarity. I assumed that seeing the physical proof of Brandon committing federal wire fraud and maintaining a secret young mistress would finally force my parents to retreat. I mistakenly believed that the undeniable threat of federal prison would make them silently fade away to deal with their catastrophic mess. But I had severely underestimated the boundless depths of their toxic delusion. For 3 peaceful days, I heard absolutely nothing from my family. The church online harassment slowly faded as my technical team blocked the coordinated attacks. I threw myself completely into my corporate crisis management work, successfully shielding my high-profile clients from the temporary public relations fallout. I thought the worst part of the storm had finally passed. I thought they were busy packing Brandon up and preparing for the inevitable FBI raid on his home. I was incredibly wrong. On Thursday morning, a nervous-looking process server walked into my sleek agency lobby holding a thick manila envelope. My assistant Sarah signed for the package and brought it directly to my desk, looking deeply concerned. "It is marked as urgent legal correspondence," Sarah stated, placing the heavy envelope right in front of me. I dismissed her with a quick nod and sliced open the top of the envelope with my silver letter opener. I pulled out a massive stack of legal documents printed on cheap, thin paper. The letterhead belonged to a discount law firm located in a rundown suburban strip mall. I began to read the formal cover letter and let out a loud, genuine laugh of pure disbelief. It was a formal cease and desist order, completely demanding that I immediately destroy all physical and digital evidence regarding Brandon and his former financial employment. The cheap lawyer actually dared to claim that my private investigator had illegally obtained the banking ledgers and that I was actively threatening Brandon with malicious corporate blackmail. But the cover letter was not even the most ridiculous part of the delivery. Attached behind it was a fully drafted civil lawsuit. Brandon was officially suing me for total control of my public relations firm. I read through the completely absurd legal claims. Brandon was formally arguing that his occasional unsolicited business advice at family dinners constituted binding corporate consulting. He claimed his profound financial expertise was the sole reason my agency had secured its largest technology clients. Because I had maliciously cut off his promised compensation without warning, he was demanding a 50% ownership stake in my multi-million-dollar company plus $3 million in immediate punitive damages for severe emotional distress. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was actually breathtaking. They were entirely bankrupt. Brandon was staring down the barrel of a massive federal indictment for wire fraud and embezzlement. Yet instead of hiring a competent criminal defense attorney to save himself from prison, he had found a desperate, cheap lawyer willing to file a frivolous civil lawsuit to try and legally steal my successful business. My parents were clearly backing this insane play, hoping to force a massive financial settlement that would magically pay off all of their terrible debts and keep Chloe living in her fake suburban paradise. They actually thought I would be intimidated by a stack of cheap legal paper. They thought I would quietly settle out of court to avoid a messy public corporate lawsuit that might scare away my elite executive clients. They fundamentally misunderstood the rules of the dangerous game they were trying to play. They thought we were playing a game of social chess where appearances mattered more than anything else. But I was not playing chess anymore. I was preparing for an absolute demolition. I neatly stacked the ridiculous legal documents and pushed them to the side of my polished glass desk. I did not feel an ounce of fear or anxiety. I did not call my corporate defense team to prepare a lengthy response to the frivolous lawsuit. I did not call the police to report the blatant extortion attempt. Instead, I confidently picked up my secure office phone and dialed a very specific number. I listened carefully before a sharp voice answered. I called my ruthless real estate attorney. I hung up the phone with my real estate attorney, feeling completely prepared for the absolute slaughter ahead. I gave him specific instructions to draft the most ironclad eviction notice permitted by the state of Georgia. I wanted my parents out of my property, and I wanted it done legally, swiftly, and without a single ounce of mercy. I left the absurd civil lawsuit sitting on my desk and shifted my focus back to my actual life. The timing of their desperate stunt was incredibly poetic because that evening I was scheduled to attend the Atlanta Corporate Excellence Gala. I was not just attending as a guest. I was the keynote honoree receiving the prestigious Businesswoman of the Year award. I arrived at the luxurious downtown ballroom wearing a custom emerald silk gown. The massive room was filled with hundreds of the most powerful corporate executives, politicians, and media representatives in the Southeast region. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as waiters passed around trays of expensive champagne. I spent the first hour networking, accepting warm congratulations, and securing 2 massive new public relations contracts. When the time came, I was called to the brightly lit stage. The applause was deafening as I stepped up to the crystal podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked out over the sea of successful professionals and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. I had built my massive empire entirely from scratch despite my family constantly trying to pull me down. I began my carefully prepared acceptance speech, speaking passionately about the unique challenges female entrepreneurs face in the modern corporate world. I was just reaching the emotional climax of my speech when a sudden loud commotion erupted near the heavy brass entrance doors at the back of the ballroom. I paused and looked up. Brandon had violently pushed his way past the 2 young event hostesses. He was wearing the exact same wrinkled suit from my office lobby, and he looked completely unhinged. He marched aggressively down the center aisle, ignoring the shocked gasps of the wealthy guests. He held a thick stack of legal papers high in the air, clearly hoping to create a massive public spectacle. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the press. He wanted the cameras flashing as he served me with his ridiculous lawsuit for a fraudulent share of my company. "Here is your lawsuit, Maya," he shouted, his voice echoing loudly across the silent ballroom. "You are officially being served for corporate fraud." Several security guards rushed forward to intercept him, but I raised my hand, signaling them to stop. I did not panic. I am a master of crisis management, and Brandon had just handed me the ultimate public relations opportunity on a silver platter. I smiled warmly, stepped out from behind the crystal podium, and walked gracefully to the edge of the stage. I reached down and calmly took the thick stack of cheap legal papers directly from his sweaty, trembling hands. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for my reaction. I turned slowly back to the microphone, holding the papers up for the entire audience and the flashing press cameras to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting clearly and confidently through the massive sound system, I was just speaking about the unfortunate hurdles successful women inevitably face. It seems the universe wanted to provide a live demonstration tonight. What you are witnessing right now is the desperate attempt of an unemployed man trying to legally steal half of a multi-million-dollar company simply because I stopped paying his luxury car lease. The ballroom erupted into a massive wave of genuine laughter and thunderous applause. The elite crowd instantly recognized the pathetic nature of his public stunt. The flashing cameras focused on me standing tall and radiant in my emerald gown, graciously holding the papers like a secondary trophy. I turned my attention back to Brandon, who was standing frozen at the bottom of the stage, looking completely horrified as the massive crowd openly mocked him. "Thank you for the special delivery, Brandon," I said, flashing him a brilliant media-ready smile. "You can leave now." The security guards grabbed him by both arms and forcefully dragged him backward down the long center aisle. The press photographers snapped dozens of pictures of his red, sweaty face as he was physically ejected from the luxurious venue. I handed the worthless court papers to the event coordinator and returned to the podium to finish my speech to a standing ovation. Brandon thought he could publicly destroy my elite reputation, but he only managed to make me look completely untouchable. He officially set the stage for the final legal showdown, and I was perfectly ready to completely obliterate him at the upcoming mediation. The morning of the legally mandated mediation arrived with a downpour washing over the streets of Atlanta. I woke up feeling rested and focused. My phone was buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand, but I deliberately ignored it. The viral video of my flawless public relations victory at the corporate gala the previous night was dominating local news feeds. I had zero interest in celebrating a minor social victory when I was preparing for an absolute legal slaughter. Today, I permanently severed the cancerous financial limbs of my toxic family. I walked into my home office and unlocked my steel safe. I needed to meticulously organize my 3 ultimate trump cards before heading downtown. I pulled out a thick black leather briefcase and opened it on my desk. First, I placed the original property deed to my parents' massive suburban mansion into the front pocket. Right next to it, I slid a perfectly drafted 30-day eviction notice prepared by my ruthless real estate attorney. That was my first trump card. They wanted to sue me, so I was going to legally render them homeless. Next, I pulled out a tightly bound stack of financial documents. These were not basic bank statements. Over the last 5 years, every time Brandon or my parents begged for a massive cash bailout, I had required them to sign standard promissory notes. I framed it as a simple tax formality at the time, but it was actually a legally binding interest-bearing personal loan agreement. They never bothered to read the fine print because they never had any intention of paying me back. The total accumulated debt now sat at a staggering $1.4 million. I placed the signed promissory notes into the middle compartment of the leather briefcase. That was my second trump card. Finally, I picked up the sleek red folder containing the devastating private investigator dossier. Inside were the high-resolution photographs of Brandon, kissing his blonde mistress, the residential lease agreement for her luxury apartment, and the undeniable federal banking records, proving he was actively embezzling money and laundering it through my father, Holy Church. I placed the red folder into the back compartment and snapped the heavy brass locks of the briefcase shut. My trap was officially loaded and ready to snap. My personal cell phone buzzed aggressively again. I picked it up and looked at the glowing screen. I currently had exactly 40 missed calls and 27 unread text messages entirely from Chloe. She had been frantically trying to reach me since 6 in the morning. I tapped her contact name and listened to the most recent voicemails. Her voice was trembling with sheer panic. "Maya, please pick up the phone," she begged in the recording, her words tumbling over each other. "Brandon bank accounts are completely frozen. The grocery store just declined my card, and the private school is threatening to expel the girls today. Brandon is acting insane, and he will not tell me where our money is. He keeps screaming about a massive settlement today, but we do not even have cash to buy gasoline. Please, Maya, I am scared. You have to help me before we lose everything. I deleted the pathetic voicemail without a single ounce of pity. She was finally waking up to the harsh reality of her fake, luxurious life, but it was far too late for apologies. She had willingly participated in the malicious attempt to have me falsely arrested for elder abuse. She had loudly cheered when Brandon tried to steal half of my company. She had made her choice, and now she was going to suffer the massive consequences of her arrogant stupidity. I turned off my cell phone entirely and tossed it onto the bed. I walked into my closet and selected my armor for the day. I chose a sharply tailored charcoal gray designer suit paired with sleek black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a tight professional bun and applied a dark, bold shade of red lipstick. I looked into the full-length mirror and saw a powerful, untouchable corporate executive staring back at me. I grabbed my black leather briefcase and headed down to my waiting car. The mediation was scheduled at a high-end corporate law firm located in the center of the financial district. I stepped out of my car and walked confidently into the towering glass skyscraper. The receptionist directed me to a massive conference room on the 40th floor. I did not bother to bring my expensive corporate legal team. I did not need them to handle a cheap strip mall lawyer and a family of desperate frauds. I walked straight into the downtown law office for the mediation, dressed impeccably and completely alone without fear. The heavy solid oak doors of the 40th floor corporate conference room swung open, and I stepped confidently inside. The massive room featured floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the gloomy, rainy Atlanta skyline. In the center of the room sat a long, polished mahogany table. My entire family was already seated on one side of the table, looking like a perfectly united front of absolute greed. Brandon sat in the middle, wearing a brand new expensive suit he undoubtedly purchased on credit. Chloe sat tightly next to him, clutching a designer handbag and shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. My mother Helen and my father Reverend Thomas flanked them on either side, sitting tall and radiating an absurd level of arrogant smugness. Next to Brandon sat a short, balding man wearing an ill-fitting cheap gray suit. He was nervously shuffling a messy stack of papers. This was clearly the discount suburban lawyer they had managed to hire for their massive extortion attempt. A professional court-appointed mediator sat at the head of the long table, looking incredibly bored. He gestured for me to take my seat on the opposite side. I gracefully pulled out a heavy leather chair and sat directly across from Brandon, placing my black leather briefcase gently on the mahogany surface. I folded my hands, resting them perfectly still. I did not bring any legal representation, the mediator noted, raising an eyebrow. Are you absolutely sure you wish to proceed with this mediation entirely alone, Maya? I am perfectly capable of handling this matter myself, I replied, my voice completely calm and steady. The cheap lawyer immediately cleared his throat loudly, standing up to make his grand opening statement. He puffed out his chest, trying to look like a high-powered corporate litigator. Miss Maya, my name is Attorney Jenkins. He began, his voice annoyingly nasal. We are gathered here today to resolve a massive breach of implied contract and severe financial damages inflicted upon my clients. Over the past 5 years, my clients established a legally binding pattern of reliance on your corporate resources. Brandon provided invaluable strategic financial consulting that directly led to the massive success of your public relations firm. Your sudden and malicious termination of this financial arrangement has caused catastrophic emotional distress and severe reputational damage. I watched Brandon smirk proudly as the lawyer spoke. Chloe reached over and patted his hand, acting like the devoted wife of a brilliant, wrongfully accused businessman. Helen nodded in stern agreement, while Reverend Thomas maintained his fake righteous posture. They truly believed this cheap theatrical performance was actually going to intimidate me into handing over my hard-earned empire. Attorney Jenkins loudly slapped a single sheet of paper onto the center of the mahogany table. Therefore, to avoid a lengthy and incredibly public civil trial, my clients are willing to graciously settle this matter today under 2 very specific conditions, he announced, leaning forward aggressively. First, we demand an immediate one-time cash payment of exactly $5 million to adequately cover the severe emotional distress and sudden financial damages. Second, we require the immediate transfer of a 30% permanent ownership stake in your corporate public relations firm directly to Brandon to properly compensate him for his massive sweat equity. The room fell completely silent. The mediator looked at the ridiculous demands and then looked over at me, clearly expecting me to erupt into a massive fit of rage. $5 million and a 30% stake in a highly successful corporate agency was an absolutely insane demand, based on absolutely zero legal precedent. Brandon crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back in his leather chair with a look of absolute triumph on his sweaty face. He genuinely thought he had completely cornered me. He thought the fear of a messy public corporate lawsuit would force me to instantly cave and write him a massive check. Chloe glared at me, waiting for me to start crying and begging for their forgiveness. I did not cry. I did not scream out in frustration or anger. I did not even frown or show the slightest hint of physical discomfort. I simply sat there in my heavy leather chair and let the absolute absurdity of their grand extortion speech hang heavily in the cold, quiet air of the luxury conference room. I decided to let them fully enjoy their pathetic fake victory for exactly 30 seconds of unbroken silence. I looked directly into Brandon, sweating eyes, watching his extremely smug confidence suddenly waver just a tiny fraction under my completely emotionless and calculating stare. Then, without saying a single word, I slowly reached forward and placed my hands firmly on the heavy brass locks of my black leather briefcase. The heavy brass locks of my black leather briefcase opened with a sharp, definitive click that echoed loudly in the silent luxury conference room. I slowly lifted the thick leather flap and reached inside the front compartment. Everyone at the mahogany table leaned forward slightly, watching my hands with intense, eager anticipation. Brandon was practically salivating, thinking I was reaching for my corporate checkbook to grant his massive extortion demand. Instead, I pulled out a single thick stack of official legal documents printed on heavy bonded paper. I placed them gently on the polished wood surface right in front of me. I looked directly at Attorney Jenkins, who was still standing proudly, puffing out his chest. "Mr. Jenkins," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of emotion. "Your clients have deliberately misinformed you about the fundamental nature of our financial relationship. There was absolutely no implied contract, and there was certainly no corporate consulting provided by this unemployed man sitting next to you. In fact, the only legally binding relationship that currently exists between myself and my family is a standard landlord and tenant agreement." Attorney Jenkins frowned deeply, his nasal voice returning immediately. "A landlord and tenant agreement?" he repeated, looking completely confused. "Miss Maya, this mediation is regarding a multi-million-dollar corporate dispute and severe emotional damages. We are not here to discuss petty residential leases. We are discussing exactly what I tell you we are discussing," I replied, my voice dropping to a sharp, authoritative edge that instantly silenced the cheap lawyer. I turned my attention away from him and looked directly at my mother, Helen, and my father, Reverend Thomas. They were both sitting stiffly, their smug expressions slowly morphing into genuine confusion. "Mom, Dad," I said, gesturing toward the thick stack of papers. "Do you remember 6 years ago when the bank was aggressively threatening to foreclose on your massive suburban mansion? You were completely bankrupt. You came to my small apartment crying and begging me to save your precious reputation in the church community. You told everyone I generously paid off your massive mortgage out of the kindness of my heart. We raised you to be a generous daughter." Helen snapped defensively, crossing her arms over her chest. "It was your familial duty to help us in our time of need. You owed us that money for giving you a wonderful life." "I did not give you a single dime, Mom," I corrected her smoothly. I did not pay off your massive mortgage. I legally purchased the entire property directly from the bank through my private limited liability company. I saved you from public eviction by buying the mansion and allowing you to live there rent-free for the last 6 years. The room fell completely silent again. Reverend Thomas' face lost all of its color. He reached across the mahogany table with trembling hands and grabbed the heavy bonded paper. He rapidly flipped through the official property deed, scanning the dense legal text. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he saw my corporate entity listed as the sole legal owner of the sprawling estate. "This cannot be right," Helen gasped, snatching the papers out of his hands. She frantically read the bold print, her designer-manicured fingernails digging sharply into the thick paper. "You told us you paid the bank to fix the loan, Maya. You specifically said the house was completely safe." "I said the house was safe from the bank," I replied, leaning back comfortably in my heavy leather chair. "And it was safe. It belongs to me. You have been living under my roof as my legal tenants on a month-to-month basis. I paid the property taxes. I paid the expensive landscaping fees. I paid for the massive roof repairs last summer. I am the sole owner of the property, and I no longer wish to financially support ungrateful tenants who actively conspire to have me falsely arrested for criminal elder abuse. You cannot do this to us." "Reverend Thomas," shouted his booming preacher voice, cracking with sheer panic. "That is our family home. We have lived in that neighborhood for 20 years. Where exactly are we supposed to go?" "That is absolutely not my problem, Dad," I stated coldly. "You should have thought about your living situation before you eagerly backed a ridiculous civil lawsuit attempting to steal my corporate agency." I reached back into my open leather briefcase and pulled out a single crisp white sheet of paper bearing the official state seal. I looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes, watching her fake wealthy reality completely crumble into absolute dust. Then, with a slow, deliberate physical motion, I gracefully slid the formal 30-day eviction notice toward her shaking hands. My mother stared blindly at the crisp white paper resting in front of her. The bold black letters spelling out notice of eviction seemed to completely shatter the fragile glass house she had lived in for the last 6 years. She did not scream or argue, she simply sat frozen in absolute disbelief. I turned my undivided attention back to the primary target sitting across the mahogany table. Attorney Jenkins cleared his throat. "Well?" He stammered, his nasal voice losing confidence. "The residential status of your parents is a separate legal matter. However, we are primarily here to address the corporate lawsuit and the $5 million settlement demand regarding my client Brandon. He still maintains a rightful claim to a 30% stake in your public relations firm, based on his extensive financial consulting and the severe emotional distress you intentionally caused him." I smiled warmly at the cheap lawyer. "Mr. Jenkins, I admire your persistent dedication to a sinking ship," I replied smoothly. "But before we discuss massive cash settlements or corporate ownership transfers, we must officially settle Brandon's outstanding debts first." Brandon scoffed loudly, leaning forward in his leather chair. "Debts?" He laughed, his voice dripping with condescending mockery. "I do not owe you a single dime, Maya. There was never any formal agreement to repay the allowance you voluntarily gave us. It was a verbal family arrangement." I reached back into the middle compartment of my black leather briefcase. "Oh, Brandon," I sighed, shaking my head slowly. "You really should know better than to sign financial paperwork without thoroughly reading the fine print." I pulled out a tightly bound stack of financial documents and tossed them onto the center of the polished mahogany table. Attorney Jenkins immediately reached forward and grabbed the stack, adjusting his cheap glasses as he began reading the top page. "Over the last 5 years, every single time Brandon and Chloe came crying to me for a massive cash bailout to pay their luxury car leases, country club fees, or private school tuition, I required Brandon to sign a simple document," I explained. "I told him it was just a standard tax formality required by my corporate accounting department to legally process large cash transfers. He was always in such a frantic, desperate hurry to get his hands on my money that he blindly signed every single page without ever asking a single question. Attorney Jenkins' face turned completely pale as he rapidly flipped through the dense pages of legal text. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically back and forth across the paper. "If you actually bother to read the bold print, Brandon," I continued, leaning comfortably back in my heavy leather chair, "you will clearly see those documents are not tax formalities. They are legally binding interest-bearing personal promissory notes. You officially agreed to repay every single dime I ever gave you at a highly competitive annual interest rate." Brandon's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You tricked me," he shouted, slamming his fist down hard on the table. "Those papers are completely invalid. You cannot legally enforce a deliberate trick. They are notarized, legally binding contracts drafted by one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in the state of Georgia." I countered sharply, my voice cutting effortlessly through his yelling. "And according to precise calculations finalized by my accounting department yesterday morning, the total accumulated principal and interest you currently owe me sits at exactly $1.4 million. This number does not even include the massive legal fees you will be forced to pay my attorneys when we finalize the upcoming civil judgment against you," I added coldly. The court-appointed mediator, who had remained entirely silent during the entire explosive exchange, suddenly leaned forward and looked at the documents with genuine professional interest. Attorney Jenkins slowly lowered the papers to the table, looking at Brandon with absolute disgust and sheer panic. The cheap lawyer realized he had taken a massive civil case on contingency for a client actually drowning in millions of dollars of legally documented debt. "You are suing me for $5 million, Brandon?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That is fascinating, because I am officially countersuing you for the $1.4 million you legally owe me, and unlike your completely fabricated corporate consulting claims, my lawsuit comes with your actual signature on 50 separate pages of binding financial contracts." The arrogant smirk vanished from Brandon's face. He sat frozen, staring blankly at the stack of promissory notes resting on the mahogany table. His breathing became incredibly shallow and erratic. Chloe turned completely pale and looked at Brandon, who was sweating profusely. He realized his pathetic extortion attempt had now officially sealed his absolute financial ruin forever in this room. Attorney Jenkins did not say another word. He simply closed his cheap briefcase and slowly pushed his chair away from the polished mahogany table. He knew a completely lost cause when he saw one. "I am withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately," he announced, looking at Brandon with pure disgust. "You blatantly lied to me about your financial status and the existence of these binding contracts. I will not be a party to this fraudulent extortion attempt." He stood up and walked briskly out of the luxury conference room, leaving my family completely abandoned and utterly defenseless. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, echoing loudly in the tense silence. Brandon was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his wrinkled suit. Chloe was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands, as the brutal reality of her shattered suburban life crashed down upon her. Reverend Thomas and Helen sat paralyzed, staring blindly at the massive stack of promissory notes and the formal eviction notice. "I am not finished yet," I stated coldly, breaking the heavy silence. I reached into the back compartment of my black leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out the sleek red folder and placed it squarely in the exact center of the table. "You thought you could intimidate me with a cheap lawyer and a fake lawsuit," I continued, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "You thought I would quietly pay you $5 million to protect my corporate reputation. You completely forgot that I am a professional crisis manager. I do not hide from scandals. I actively destroy the people who try to create them." I opened the red folder and spread the glossy, high-resolution photographs across the mahogany surface. Chloe stopped crying instantly. She stared down at the clear images of her husband intimately kissing his young blonde mistress outside the luxury hotel. She gasped sharply, her hands flying to her mouth in genuine horror. "That is Jessica," I said, looking directly at my sister. She is 24 years old, and she lives in a luxury downtown apartment completely funded by the money Brandon stole from my corporate accounts. While you were begging me for $10,000 to save your fake country club reputation, your husband was using my money to pay her rent. Brandon buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, defeated sob. But I was not done. I pushed the offshore gambling ledgers and the federal banking records toward my father. And here is the absolute grand finale, Dad, I said, my voice turning incredibly dark. These are the detailed records proving Brandon was fired for embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his wealthy elderly clients. And these specific wire transfers show exactly how he illegally laundered that stolen money through your Sacred Church nonprofit tax identification number to pay off his massive illegal offshore gambling debts. The court-appointed mediator physically recoiled from the table, realizing he was currently sitting in a room with individuals actively committing massive federal crimes. Reverend Thomas began to weep uncontrollably, his fake righteous facade completely obliterated. Maya, please, he begged, his voice cracking with pure terror. We can fix this quietly. We are still your family. You are a federal criminal, Dad, I snapped back. And you are a complete fraud. I have already compiled every single document, photograph, and wire transfer into a neat encrypted digital file. It is currently sitting securely on my secure corporate server, completely ready to be emailed directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The sheer terror radiating from my family was absolutely palpable. They were no longer worried about luxury cars or country club reputations. They were staring directly at the terrifying prospect of spending the next decade in a federal prison. I stood up from my heavy leather chair and smoothly buttoned my tailored charcoal gray designer suit. I looked down at the pathetic, broken people sitting across from me. You have exactly 48 hours, I announced loudly, delivering the absolute ultimate kill shot. You will immediately drop this ridiculous and entirely frivolous civil lawsuit. You will all sign permanent strict non-disclosure agreements legally, preventing you from ever speaking about me or my corporate agency again. And Mom and Dad, you will completely vacate my expensive property by the end of the week. I picked up my empty black leather briefcase and walked purposefully toward the heavy oak doors. If you fail to meet even one of these specific demands by Friday morning, I will personally hit send on that email, and I will happily watch all of you go directly to federal prison. Have a very wonderful afternoon. I reached the heavy oak door and wrapped my hand around the cool brass handle, ready to walk out and leave them to their self-inflicted destruction. Before I could even turn the knob, a loud, desperate scraping sound echoed behind me. Brandon had violently pushed his heavy leather chair back and jumped to his feet. "Wait, Maya, please wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Do not send that email to the federal authorities. I will sign whatever you want me to sign right now." I turned around slowly, releasing the brass handle. Brandon was practically sprinting across the luxury conference room toward the polished mahogany table. He grabbed the cheap pen his lawyer had left behind and frantically began scribbling his signature across the formal withdrawal of the civil lawsuit. "Brandon, what are you doing?" Chloe screamed, standing up and grabbing his arm. "You cannot just give up. We need that money to save our house and pay for the girls' school." Brandon violently yanked his arm out of her grasp, shooting her a look of pure hatred. "There is no money, Chloe." He snarled, his face completely red. "It is all gone. Everything is gone. I am not going to federal prison just to protect your pathetic lifestyle. You are the one who forced me to hire that cheap lawyer. You pushed me to do this today." Chloe stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck. "I pushed you," she gasped, her voice trembling. "You are the one who embezzled the money. You are the one secretly paying rent for a 24-year-old cocktail waitress. How could you do this to us? Because you are completely exhausting, Chloe." Brandon shouted back, entirely abandoning any remaining shred of human decency. "You contribute absolutely nothing to my life. Jessica actually appreciates me. You just constantly complain and spend money we do not have. I am done with this insane family." Reverend Thomas tried to intervene, stepping toward his son-in-law with his hands raised. "Now listen here, Brandon. You have a holy covenant with my daughter," he began, his preacher voice trembling weakly. "Shut up, old man," Brandon snapped aggressively, pointing the pen at my father. "You took a cut of the dirty money to pay your golf fees. You are just as guilty as I am. You can sit here and preach, but I am saving myself." Brandon threw the signed legal documents across the mahogany table toward me. He quickly signed the strict non-disclosure agreement next, his hand shaking violently. There he breathed heavily, backing away from the table. "The lawsuit is officially dropped. I will never speak about your company again. Delete the files, Maya." I calmly picked up the signed documents, verifying his messy signature. "I will delete the files when you leave the state of Georgia." "Brandon," I replied coldly, "if I ever see your face in Atlanta again, I will send the entire digital dossier to the authorities." Brandon did not hesitate for a single second. He grabbed his cheap briefcase, completely ignored his sobbing wife, and ran out of the luxury conference room. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, leaving a deafening silence in his cowardly wake. Chloe collapsed back into her leather chair, burying her face in her trembling hands. The beautiful golden child, who had spent her entire life mocking me, was finally experiencing the absolute devastation of her own toxic choices. Her fake wealthy husband was a federal criminal who just abandoned her for a much younger woman. Her perfect suburban life was entirely funded by stolen money and my stolen credit cards. She had absolutely nothing left. She slowly raised her head and looked at me. Her expensive makeup was completely ruined, running down her pale cheeks in dark, messy streaks. "Maya, please," she begged, her voice reduced to a pathetic, broken whisper. "He left me. I have no money. I have no car. I do not even have a way to get back to my house. Please, Maya, you have to help me. Just give me enough money to hire a divorce lawyer. Let me and the girls come stay at your penthouse until I can figure this out. I am your sister." I looked directly at the selfish woman who had laughed when her husband insulted my career at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I carefully placed the signed legal documents into my black leather briefcase and securely snapped the brass locks shut. "You told me I was dead to you, Chloe," I said, my voice completely devoid of any human sympathy. "You should not ask a ghost for a massive cash bailout." I turned my back on her, sobbing, and walked proudly out of the conference room. The rest of my work week was remarkably peaceful. I did not receive a single text message or voicemail from any member of my family. The silence was absolute golden proof that my brutal 48-hour ultimatum had worked flawlessly. They were finally too terrified to try another desperate manipulation tactic. When Friday morning arrived, the sky over Atlanta was bright and perfectly clear. I drove my luxury car toward the massive suburban estate for the very last time. I did not go to help them pack. I went to personally verify that my property was completely vacated and legally secured by my private security team. I pulled into the upscale neighborhood and immediately realized the main residential street was entirely blocked. I parked my car a full block away and walked the rest of the distance on foot. A massive crowd had gathered directly outside the tall, wrought iron gates of my property. It was not a friendly neighborhood block party. It was a furious, organized protest. Earlier that week, a highly detailed anonymous email containing select portions of Brandon offshore gambling ledgers and the church tax fraud documents had mysteriously found its way into the private inboxes of every single elder and choir member in my father congregation. I am a professional public relations expert, and I know exactly how to quietly distribute a devastating press release without leaving a single digital fingerprint. The church community had officially discovered exactly how their generous weekly tithes were actually being spent. Over 100 angry parishioners were marching back and forth across the manicured front lawn holding large cardboard signs. One sign simply read "False Prophet," while another demanded full immediate financial restitution for the stolen congregation funds. Two large moving trucks were parked awkwardly in the wide circular driveway, surrounded by a heavy local police presence called in to maintain civil order and prevent sudden violence. I slipped quietly through the angry, screaming crowd, completely unrecognized in my casual weekend clothes and oversized dark sunglasses. I watched from the edge of the driveway as the absolute destruction of my religious empire played out in real time. Deacon Wallace. The exact same man who had angrily called my office to condemn my wicked soul was now standing proudly on the front porch holding a portable megaphone. Deacon Wallace was loudly reading an official proclamation from the church board of directors. His booming voice echoed powerfully over the angry crowd. Thomas, you are officially stripped of your pastoral title and permanently excommunicated from this holy congregation. We have formally handed all financial records over to the federal authorities for a full criminal investigation. You are a massive disgrace to this community. My father stood in the grand doorway of the mansion, completely broken. He was wearing a plain gray sweatshirt instead of his usual expensive tailored suit. He looked small, weak, and entirely pathetic. He did not say a single word in his own defense. He simply lowered his head and shuffled slowly back inside the house to continue packing his ruined life into cheap brown cardboard boxes. I stood there silently watching the hired movers load heavy luxury furniture into the trucks. Everything they had purchased with my money was being hauled away to a small, cheap apartment across town. Chloe was nowhere to be seen, presumably hiding in shame or already staying on a sympathetic friend couch. Brandon was long gone, having fled the state completely to avoid the incoming federal indictments and the wrath of his bookies. The grand suburban illusion was finally over. The heavy oak front door opened one last time. My mother Helen stepped out onto the wide front porch carrying a single taped cardboard box. She looked incredibly exhausted. Her perfect hair unraveled and her expensive designer clothes completely wrinkled. As she walked down the concrete steps, she suddenly spotted me standing quietly near the edge of the busy driveway. She stopped dead in her tracks. The angry protesters continued shouting loudly behind her, but Helen focused her attention entirely on me. Her dark eyes burned with an intense, fiery hatred that completely defied her current pathetic reality. She marched straight toward me, clutching the cheap cardboard box tightly against her chest. She stopped just inches away from my face, her breathing heavy and ragged. "I hope you are completely satisfied, Maya," she hissed, her voice shaking with pure venom. "You deliberately destroyed your own flesh and blood. You are a wicked, heartless girl, and I curse the exact day you were born. You will spend the rest of your miserable life entirely alone because nobody could ever truly love a horrible monster like you." I listened to my mother scream her vicious curse into the crisp morning air, but I felt absolutely nothing. I did not argue or defend myself. I simply turned around and walked back to my luxury car, leaving her standing on the concrete steps holding her cheap cardboard box. Her hateful words vanished into the wind, completely powerless against the unshakable peace I had finally secured. 6 months quickly passed, and the harsh reality of their brand new lives officially settled in. The massive suburban illusion was entirely replaced by the brutal consequences of their own actions. Chloe was forced to desperately enter the workforce for the very first time in her adult life. She managed to secure a minimum wage retail job at a massive discount department store in a rundown strip mall. The former golden child who used to spend her afternoons sipping expensive mimosas at the exclusive country club was now spending 8 hours a day standing on her swollen feet, scanning cheap plastic merchandise. She wore an ugly, stiff polyester uniform and a scratched plastic name tag. One Tuesday afternoon, a particularly difficult customer began screaming at Chloe over an expired discount coupon for paper towels. Chloe had to stand there and silently take the vicious verbal abuse, biting her tongue to keep the only pathetic paycheck she had left to feed her daughters. Her perfect manicured nails were gone entirely, replaced by cracked skin and pure exhaustion. Brandon was living an even darker nightmare. He never made it very far out of state. He was currently hiding in a cheap, filthy motel, on the absolute outskirts of a neighboring city, constantly looking over his shoulder. The young blonde mistress Jessica had immediately dumped him the exact second she realized his bank accounts were frozen and the luxury rent checks had officially stopped arriving. Now Brandon spent his miserable days aggressively dodging threatening phone calls from both his angry illegal bookies and relentless corporate debt collectors. Every single time a loud, heavy vehicle drove past his dingy motel window, he jumped violently, terrified that the federal authorities had finally tracked him down to serve his impending criminal indictment. He was a completely broken, paranoid shadow of the arrogant finance broker he once proudly pretended to be. My parents were forced to move into a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the undesirable side of town. The walls were incredibly thin and the old plumbing constantly leaked. Reverend Thomas spent his quiet days sitting silently in a worn-out fabric recliner, staring blankly at a small television. His massive church congregation had completely abandoned him. His former devoted followers now actively crossed the street to deliberately avoid walking near him if they accidentally spotted him in public. Helen tried to maintain her arrogant superiority, but her entire social currency was completely bankrupt. When she visited the local discount grocery store to buy cheap canned food, she unexpectedly bumped into Sister Margaret from her old church choir. Helen offered a fake bright smile, hoping for a friendly, familiar interaction. Sister Margaret simply looked her up and down with absolute disgust, turned her metal shopping cart around, and walked silently down another aisle without saying a single word. Helen was officially a total social outcast, completely invisible and entirely irrelevant. While their toxic lives crumbled into absolute dust, my personal world expanded in beautiful, unimaginable ways. I did not spend the rest of my life entirely alone like my bitter mother had viciously predicted. I simply replaced my toxic biological relatives with a beautiful chosen family, who actually loved and respected me for exactly who I was. That very same evening, I hosted a lavish, elegant dinner party at my gorgeous downtown penthouse. The massive mahogany dining table was not filled with entitled, greedy people demanding my money or loudly insulting my successful career. Instead, the long table was surrounded by my incredibly supportive corporate colleagues, my fiercely loyal personal friends, and my wonderful, loving fiancé. We drank expensive vintage wine and ate a spectacular catered meal, laughing loudly until our stomachs physically hurt. The crystal chandeliers glowed warmly overhead, illuminating a room completely devoid of any hidden agendas or malicious family drama. I raised my elegant glass of champagne to make a heartfelt toast, looking around the table at the brilliant, smiling faces of the people who genuinely valued my presence. I realized right then that setting a brutal boundary had not destroyed my life at all. It had actually saved my life. The incredible joy echoing through my beautiful home was the absolute ultimate victory against the miserable people who tried to break me. I finally had the beautiful, peaceful, and wonderfully loving chosen family that I had always truly deserved to have in my life forever. 1 full year later, the profound peace I cultivated in my life only continued to flourish and expand. I sat comfortably on the velvet sofa in my penthouse on a quiet Sunday morning. The early sunlight streamed brightly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling Atlanta skyline. My public relations agency had recently secured 3 major international corporate contracts, effectively doubling our annual revenue. I was physically healthier, mentally sharper, and emotionally stronger than ever before. I gently placed my warm ceramic coffee mug onto the glass table and opened my sleek silver laptop to review my weekly schedule. As the screen brightened, a new notification chimed softly from my personal email inbox. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line instantly caught my attention. It simply read, "Please read this. Maya, I am so sorry." I clicked the message, and my eyes scanned the opening paragraph. It was from Chloe. She had created a brand new email account specifically to bypass the strict digital blocks I had placed on all of her previous contact numbers and social media profiles. Her message was incredibly long, stretching far down the glowing screen in a massive, desperate block of text. Maya. I know you probably hate me, the email began. I know I did terrible, unforgivable things to you. Brandon completely ruined my life and left me with absolutely nothing. I am working 2 terrible jobs just to keep a cheap roof over my head. Mom and Dad will not even speak to me anymore because they blame me for losing the big house. I have had an entire year to think about how awful I was to you. I was so incredibly jealous of your success, and I let my own pathetic insecurities completely destroy the only real sister I ever had. I kept my face blank as I skimmed the next few sentences. Chloe went on to describe her miserable daily struggles, detailing exactly how hard it was to raise her 2 daughters entirely alone on a minimum wage salary. She tried to use my nieces as heavy emotional leverage, claiming the young girls constantly cried and asked when they would ever get to see their favorite Aunt Maya again. Then came the inevitable desperate pitch. I am a completely different person now, Maya. She wrote her words practically begging through the digital screen. I want to sincerely apologize to you in person. I want to slowly rebuild our broken relationship. Please just let me buy you a cup of coffee so we can start over as a real family. I did not even bother to read the rest of the lengthy email. I stopped reading right there in the middle of her pathetic plea for a magical fresh start. A year ago, reading those desperate words might have triggered a fleeting sense of guilt or a heavy wave of deep sadness. But today, sitting in my beautiful, peaceful penthouse, I felt absolutely nothing. I did not feel angry. I did not feel vindictive. I simply felt entirely indifferent. I realized that responding to her email, even just to reject her, would give her the exact emotional validation she was desperately seeking. It would open a tiny crack in the massive steel wall I had built to protect my peace. I moved my computer mouse directly over the trash icon. I did not type a single word in reply. I did not send a fiery closing statement. I simply clicked my mouse and completely deleted the message, permanently erasing her desperate words from my computer. I quickly blocked the new email address, ensuring she could never reach me through that avenue ever again. I closed my laptop, picked up my warm coffee mug, and took a long, satisfying sip. My life is entirely my own now. I look directly into the camera, addressing you, the viewer watching my story. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. We are socially conditioned from birth to blindly forgive the people who share our genetics, no matter how severely they disrespect, abuse, or betray us. We are constantly told to keep the peace and be the bigger person. But I learned the absolute hardest way possible that staying completely loyal to toxic people only ensures your own destruction. My parents and my sister actively chose their own greed over my well-being. They tried to steal my hard-earned success and throw me into a federal prison to protect a criminal. Cutting off their financial access was just the beginning. Completely cutting off their emotional access to my life was the ultimate triumph. Sometimes the biggest blessing is taking out your own trash. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Let me know in the comments. The story of Maya offers a profound and often painful lesson. Sharing DNA does not automatically entitle someone to your life, your resources, or your peace of mind. Society heavily pushes the narrative that family is everything, conditioning us to tolerate mistreatment, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation under the guise of unconditional love. However, this narrative can be a dangerous trap. Maya's journey illustrates that toxic behavior remains toxic regardless of who perpetrates it. Her relatives viewed her not as a beloved family member, but as a human bank account and a convenient scapegoat for their own catastrophic choices. The core takeaway here is the absolute necessity of setting and enforcing uncompromising boundaries. When we allow familial guilt to override our self-respect, we enable the very behavior that drains us. True loyalty is earned through mutual respect, honesty, and unwavering support, not extracted through manipulation or entitlement. Maya's ultimate victory was not just in legally outmaneuvering her fraudulent brother-in-law or evicting her complicit parents. Her true triumph was the quiet, absolute indifference she felt a year later, when she deleted her sister's email. She realized that walking away from an abusive family is never an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and you cannot thrive while tethered to people determined to drag you down. We all deserve a chosen family that celebrates our success rather than exploiting it.